All right, hello and welcome to my portrait and Ktisis light tutorial. If you're interested in making the kinds of Gpose that I've been making over the past few weeks, which is this kind of solid background portrait shot with really strong highlights and pretty good lighting, such as these, well, I'm going to teach you exactly how to do that and kind of explain my thought process behind doing the Gpose, as well as why I do certain things, the kinds of lights that I use, and what you should use. So right off the bat, I want to mention that if you plan on using modded lights, you're going to need Ktisis's testing version. So if you don't have the testing version or you don't know how to get it, it's very simple. You just type XL settings in your chat box. You're going to be on this tab. You're going to go to experimental tab. Make sure that this get plugin testing build is enabled. Then you're going to close this. Oh, you're going to save at the bottom. Sorry. You're going to close this page. And then you're going to tab XL plugins. Head over to the testing availables section. And then type Ktisis in the search bar. Right click it and receive plugin testing build. Once you do that, you'll have the option to install the Ktisis testing version. You can also do it for Brio. You can see here I have Brio Dev, which is the testing version for Brio. However, for this tutorial, it's not mandatory. It's just Brio Dev has some functions that are currently in testing that you can't get with regular Brio at the moment. Once you have the Ktisis testing version, your Ktisis window should look like mine. So if your Ktisis looks like this, you're good to go. So before I start getting into the Gpose, I kind of want to explain a little bit about why using modded lights versus vanilla in-game lights is good, and kind of walk you through the thought process of switching from these vanilla lights to the Ktisis lights. So when we talk about vanilla lights are what's called point lights. So if you look here, to create a new light section, we have four choices. We have point, spot, area, and sun. We're going to ignore sun. You don't really use sun all that much unless you plan to relight a scene completely by yourself. They're really hard to work with, so I don't usually use it. So the equivalent to the vanilla lights is a point, and then I'll cover spot and area later in the tutorial. So if I was to spawn vanilla lights directly behind my character, just like this, you can set the type, which is the intensity. So for example, type 1, type 2, or type 3. Now, as you can see, it's affecting both the background and my character, as well as radiating light in a way that's not natural. What I mean by this is I place this light behind my character, but it seems to go through my character's shoulder to radiate or shine on the chest area, or even go through the jacket, which is, well, pretty unnatural for a light. So this is the main advantage of using a Ktisis light. So you have something called the light editor, which here you can see this camera light 1 is the one that I just spawned. You can right click it, go to edit lighting, and then your tab might look a little bit different from mine, but the idea is the same. It's just I split mine because I find it more convenient to have my UI this way. So you can use Ktisis lights and generate realistic shadows with lighting. What does that mean? If I take these three here, you can see it doesn't really change much in terms of lighting for my character. Again, this is editing a vanilla light. It does affect the way that it's rendered for objects here. If I tick and untick cast object shadows, you can see it's realistically rendering this shadow, right? For the ledge in Limsa. But it's not doing anything for the cast character shadows here. So you can see here ticking and unticking it doesn't do anything. So instead, I'm going to spawn a Ktisis light of the same version, which is, again, a point light. So I'm going to delete this one here. And then I'm going to go ahead and spawn a point light. Right click again on the camera editor. And then I'm going to make it red so it's super obvious. And swap back to my character so you can see it has the same kind of illumination around the character's chest. But then if I'm to tick shadows, all three, suddenly it doesn't render through the chest anymore. So you can see here, if I rotate my character, the light realistically renders based on what side of my character is angled towards the light. And this is a really, really good advantage if you're trying to light scene yourself or you're trying to do portraits. Because for example, if I was to use a highlight light, so I'm just going to grab this light. If you'd like to see your lights in real time where they're placed, all you have to do is you click this eye here, the toggle overlay visibility, and then you click the eye that corresponds to the light. So as soon as I click it, you'll see the light show up. So you can see it here now in space. You can click on that light and then you'll be able to see, even move it around if you have the gizmo visibility enabled. So here you have the gizmo visibility enabled. You can set it to position or rotation. In this case, I'm going to set it to position. I'm just going to drag it closer, just like this. I'm going to simulate kind of a highlight instead. So I just rotate it right there and I'll rotate it again. So if I'm shining this light on the side of my character and I don't have cast character shadows enabled, you can see here it renders through the hip of the character. It lights up the thigh in a very unrealistic way. There's no way the light shines through the thigh and renders all the way through. So this is the reason why you would want to use a Ktisis light. Now, in vanilla, when you use a light, you have three options. So you have the type 3, the type 2, and the type 1. This is mostly for intensity. Ktisis Lights doesn't call them the same way, but it's still the same process. So you have here the fall off type. You have linear, quadratic, and cubic. Linear is type 3. As you can see, it's like super intense. It even affects the background. Quadratic is type 2, which doesn't radiate as much. And then cubic, is the type 1, not as intense light. So now that we know this, and we kind of have an idea of what the advantages of Ktisis lights are, I'm just going to drag my character over and explain why, in terms of lighting, I actually never use point lights for portraits. So I'm just going to grab my character here. Going to click on this model transform. So this is with Brio. Going to click on the model transform, set it to position, and then I'll drag my character in space. Enable the work camera from Ktisis, which lets me fly around. So I'm just going to bring my character over next to the rock over there. That seems about right, just like this. And then now the work camera is disabled, but my camera is still over here and I'm quite far away and I don't want to be dragging my camera manually. Well, all you have to do is to make sure that you're targeting your actor. You can do that in Brio by right-clicking and then clicking target. And then you go to Ktisis, click this edit camera button, which lets you move the camera around. And all you have to do is offset camera to target model. Boom, you get teleported there. So if you're someone who drags actors around a lot in your scene, I think this will save you quite a bit of time. So in terms of point lights, if I was to use a point light to light up a scene and there's objects behind, it's not always advantageous because it affects everything around it. Again, it's like a mini sun. So yes, I do get some nice highlighting on the silhouette of my character, but it also affects things around it. So this is not really what you're looking for, except if you're trying to simulate maybe the reflection of a source of light. You're trying to enhance, for example, the effect of a fire. In that case, you do want to be radiating light. But for portraits specifically, there's something better than a point light. So this is what I'm going to introduce now. I'm just going to move myself a little bit to the side here so I can demo this and close this for now. I'm going to spawn two kinds of lights. The first one is a spotlight, and then I'm going to scoot myself over again a little bit. You know what? I'll just use the work camera for this one. And the second one I will use is the area light. So the spotlight is quite huge. I'm going to reduce it in size. How far is it actually? Again, you can enable where to see where they are by clicking the eye here. So I enabled them. I'll be able to move them around. So I'm going to move them closer to the wall for this demo. Okay, awesome. So I have the spotlight and the area light. So it's very easy to see the spotlight is a circle and the area light is a square. When you're working with portraits especially, it's a lot more advantageous to work with a light that has a shape like this because it lets you play a lot with angles. Whereas using a spotlight to light up the side of your character, for example, the circle can sometimes create some patterns that are not as aesthetically pleasing. For example, just like the shape of the circle here doesn't really fit with the line of the character. I just find it easier to work with straight shapes in general. So for this portrait tutorial, I will exclusively be using spotlights. However, I'll exclusively be using area lights. However, spotlights still have their uses outside of Gpose, portrait Gpose like I'm going to do today. And I use them for a lot of stuff, just not for what I'm going to do today. For example, you can use them, can place them between the character and the wall to get kind of a moon effect. Or you can just use them to highlight a character's face in a way that is more natural than the portrait, the area light for portraits. So now I'm going to touch quickly on some of the functions of the light editor. So I don't need this spotlight anymore. I'm going to right click it and delete it and just focus on this one for now, this area light. So if you're familiar with Gposing, if you are to edit a pose, for example, let's say I was to drag this arm around, move it up. It's very easy to just go back and undo what you're doing. If you did something that you're not satisfied with, you have an undo button. For now, unfortunately, lights don't have an undo button. So I'm going to talk about two ways that you can move lights, with one of them being better if you're like me and you're someone who kind of has trouble visualizing things in 3D space and loses sight of their lights very easily. So going through the light editor here, the first thing that we have is light type. So light type, obviously we're going to leave that to area light. If you're changing it to spot, it's going to edit what kind of light it is. So we're going to keep it on area light. And then we have the light angle. So the light angle dictates how the light is shining from the point that you set it to. So this is the up and down, and this is the left and right. Now, what's cool about this is that it's not physically moving the light. So for example, if I'm moving stuff around, you can see here, even if I set it to rotation, you can see the rotation does not move. Whereas, for example, if I set it back to 0 and then I use this gizmo and I move it up and down, now this is physically affecting the light. What I like about this is when you're in portrait mode, you're obviously in most of the time in vertical, and you're working with a few lights and you don't really get to see where they are. So being able to move the lights and affect its angle without affecting where it is or where it's actually shining. So if you do something and you want to reset it back to 0, it's very easy. You either just drag the thing back to 0 or you control click it. Control click lets you enter any value manually, so you can just control click and then set back to 0 and you're good to go. So most of the time, this is what I'll use to tilt lights. There are some times where obviously you have to use, you have to physically move the light or physically rotate it to get the effect that you need. And can't really be avoided, but I'll try to work with the light angle as much as I can, because again, I get really lost in 3D space. Next, we have the fall off angle. So the fall off angle could be called diffusion. So it's how much the light diffuses from the edge of the shape. So you can see at fall off angle 0, the shape is extremely sharp, the square is very tight, and then as I raise it, it diffuses more and more, just like that, until it's, well, basically not recognizable anymore. So obviously this is a very high value most of the time for portraits, especially. For some lights, I will be using a fall off angle of like 1 or 2, 3, depending on the effect I'm looking for, especially for the main frontal light. Usually I'll diffuse it a little bit, but for highlights, I will not usually mess with the fall off angle all that much. Next, we have the fall off type. So we're not going to mess with this one. We're going to leave it to quadratic. This is again like type 3, type 2, and type 1 in Gpose. I don't really see the need to change this. You can get the effect that you're looking for with the other sliders, and I just find it more precise. So I'll usually leave it on quadratic, which should be the equivalent of a type 2 vanilla light. But yeah, I'll just leave it on quadratic. Now the fall off power and intensity I'll leave for last because they're kind of the same thing. I'll cover the color, so the color is very easy. Color just lets you tweak the color of the shape that you're looking for. I do want to mention that this game treats black, the black color, as transparency. So if you lower here, the more black you add, the more the light fades. So I'll usually try to stay with like a very bright color, either in the whites or in the colored area. And then if I want to tune it down, instead of lowering the color, I will change the fall off power, the intensity. And lastly, for range, I'm actually going to bring my character over to demonstrate one of the practical uses of range. So I'm going to have her right here. So range can be quite useful if you're trying to do highlighting and you're really set on one placement of your light. But it's not perfect. So let's take a look at this hypothetical situation. Let's say I look at this and I say, wow, I really like this highlight, but I don't really like how it's shining on the leg here. Well, lucky for me, this part is closer to this light than this part is. So I can use the range to fix it. So I'm going to lower the range all the way back to 0. And then I'll slowly increase it, and you can see eventually I'll manage to get the light just a tiny teeny bit. So now the light is shining here, but because I've tweaked the range, it doesn't affect my character's thigh anymore. So the range is basically how far the light shines. You can see we can't really see it on the wall anymore either. So I'm going to set the range back to 100 and bring my character back over. Now, the last two sliders, fall off power and intensity, are kind of the same, but their use cases can vary slightly. So the fall off power, this is a little bit hard to explain, and honestly, I'm not too sure if my definition of it is correct. But the fall off power, kind of like intensity, regulates how much the light fades and how fast, whereas intensity is how bright your light is. So if you raise the intensity, your light becomes more intense. And if you lower your intensity, your light becomes less intense. Now, intensity usually works on a scale from 0 to 1, where as you can see here, the light is almost pure red. Let me set it to pure red. The light is pure red. And then if I was to raise the intensity, it's just, it's quite strong, quite saturated. So fall off power will also affect how much the light falls off, which kind of looks like intensity, but it's the opposite of intensity. So at 0, it means the light never falls off. No matter what distance it's at, it will always shine the same way. So you can see I can bring the light super far and it never stops falling off. Whereas if I have the fall off power at 1, and then even if I crank the intensity all the way up, it takes like a while to get the same effect, right? So, and then if I was to physically move the light, you can see it changing still. So a fall off power of 0 means the light never loses any intensity. Now bringing the light back closer. Bringing the light back closer. You can see here, if I'm to increase the fall off power, this affects how much the light is falling via distance. Usually I find that the fall off power is a lot more granular. So If I'm using it to light a character and the light is white, I find that I get a lot more control over how strong it is with the fall off power. So if I want to regulate a light, I will usually use the fall off power instead of the intensity. And then the last setting that I want to touch on, if I bring the light back to my character, here I'm going to set the fall off power back to 1. We got a bit of a flashbang situation, but it's perfect. I'm going to show the use of this, enable reflections. So reflections make it so you don't have these kind of effects on the clothes anymore. This can be useful, for example, if you're shining a light and it's doing a highlight situation. So let's say I rotate my character a little bit and move over there. So I like the fact that it's highlighting the silhouette, but I don't like the fact that it's reflecting on my clothes all that much. You can just mess with the reflection. This is also good if you want to avoid the light shining on the hair so you can see. Even though I have shadows enabled, if the reflection is on, it reflects on the hair, makes it look a lot whiter. Makes it look a lot whiter. If the reflection is off, then the hair doesn't get affected, nor do the clothes in terms of shine, but the skin still is affected. So that's kind of the overall introduction to Ktisis Lights, why you would want to use them, and what they're good for. So now that we've covered Ktisis Lights, I'm gonna start and go through my process of doing a portrait Gpose using what we just learned. So I'll see you in a second. All right, so we've learned Ktisis Lights. I got some water and now I'm ready to get started on this portrait of my friend who so graciously provided me their MCDF. I have like a backlog of portraits to get through, so I figured that I would get through it while working on this tutorial. So thank you, Lokier, for your MCDF that I'm going to be using today. So I already have the pose loaded. In order to save time, I went through the pose list and then I loaded something that I was happy with. If you are loading your own pose through Brio, one thing I recommend is here when you go to import pose, you can go to import options and you can untick face, eyes, lips, jaw, ears. Especially if you want to use poses that were made in Endwalker or you're using a sculpt. Usually if you have these ticked and you try to import either an old pose or you have a sculpt, your face is going to look all wrong. So try to have these off unless you have a vanilla face, then it should be fine. Next, you also probably saw me tick on the character gaze will follow camera movement. This is if you use Brio to pose. I like to enable this just because it saves me a little bit of work in like posing the eyelids, and sometimes it just gives a different feel to the pose while I'm testing out poses, just having the eyes like that. I know Brio just implemented their dynamic face control, which kind of lets you do the same thing, but I'm just using, I'm used to doing it in vanilla and it's still in the dev build. So yeah, I don't really use it yet. I'm scared of crashing mid Gpose. I use the tried and true tested track camera gaze until the dynamic face control is implemented in Brio for real. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how I get those backgrounds that I usually do in my portrait shots. So these really bright colored backgrounds that don't mess with hair. So just as an example here, I'm going to turn Lokier sideways and I'm going to look at an effect called Chromakey. So Chromakey is basically what we use like a green screen. So you can change the color. And then if I was to use Chromakey for green screening, you can see here it really affects the quality of the hair. So it looks kind of choppy. The silhouette of the character is a little bit unclear, and it's just, especially if you have like hair that's really strandy, really modded, this will make your hair look horrible. So I don't really recommend using Chromakey for background. You can use a studio, and it's something that people have been using for a while, but if you use a studio and you shine a light directly on the character, you will see the shadow of your character being reflected in the background of the studio, so that's not always super aesthetically pleasing. Instead, I use a method taught to me by someone called Aster. They also kind of taught me the basic of this lighting, and I've been experimenting with it more and more. So Aster, if you're watching this, thank you so much. You're the GOAT, and you really got me into this portrait style, so I really, really appreciate it. So the first thing we're going to do is, again, I'm going to enable the overlay here with Brio, and I'm going to move my character down about here. Gonna offset camera to target model to warp directly to them. And I think this is good. Maybe I'll drag them a bit more. The reason why we're doing this is because the method we're going to use to get this colored background is fog through the Ktisis environment editor. So if you don't know what the environment editor does, it lets you edit a lot of things related to the environment. For example, you can change what skybox your map is currently rendering, or you can change what the clouds look like. So just like this, you can pick from the list. So you can do a lot of stuff with the environment editor. I've used it extensively in a lot of my Gposes. But today we're not going to focus on the sky. We're actually going to focus on the fog. But before I do start explaining this background, I just want to quickly mention, if you're outside, try to make it so the sun is still affecting your character in terms of ambient lighting, but it's not shining directly on it. So you can see here, her Lokius character is really brightened up, but the sun is not shining on her. The reason why is, since we're doing manual lighting, I like to have as much input on what light is being shown where as possible. So I don't really like the sun for this specific part. However, I do want to mention this. I think this is something super, super powerful. Quickly, if you're someone who takes a lot of Gposes outside, you might have noticed a lot of the times you like where the sun is pointed. For example, let's say I was really satisfied with the way the sun highlighted the chest and a little bit of the neck area, but I didn't really like the color. Before, you couldn't do anything about it, but with the environment editor, you can just go here to light, click enable, and then you can actually mess with the color of the sunlight. So if you don't want that orange yellow look that comes with natural lighting, you can actually just set it to all the way to white, or maybe you can even set it to more orange if you're trying to simulate like a golden hour type of effect. But yeah, this is super, super powerful, and I use it a lot. It depends on the map, what you can do with it. Some maps will let you mess with the ambient light. Some maps will let you mess with like these unknown values. They do different things. But yeah, you can tweak the temperature, you can tweak the saturation. Oops, sorry for the flashbang there. You can tweak the saturation as well as different values. But yeah, the sunlight one is really, really good. And even though it's not the main focus of the tutorial, I did want to mention it. So now that we're ready to start, posing, what we're going to do is we're going to go to this fog tab here. We're going to click enable. And the first thing that we're going to do is set the distance to 0. And set the thickness to 100. So immediately you can see we kind of get this effect. Now earlier, while I was introducing lights, especially the color for lights, I did mention that the game treats black as transparency. So you can see here, we can still see through the fog pretty well. And it's not a completely opaque background. So that's because you can see here, it's like halfway through. So there's a lot of black mixed in with our color. So as we raise the lights, you can see it's getting harder and harder to see the background. And then if we pick a color, eventually it'll be almost impossible to see anything related to the background. So like, for example, if I was to pick red, which is the color I'm going to go with today, because Loki, her main theme has always been red. So I've already picked red for that. So you can see we can't see the background already. But you might notice that our characters not as clear as it could be. It looks a little bit off. The reason being is we actually need to edit the distance. So you will control click, and then you'll set it to maybe 2 or 3 so that it doesn't render on top of our character anymore. Usually 3 or 4 is as good as it gets. You can see the difference if it's at 0 versus 3. Now it's not rendering on top of our character anymore. So I think I'll go for a nice red, and then I'll get my posing shader on. The reason being, my shader affects the way the light looks a little bit, so I like to get the shader on before, so I can actually tweak the light, the color I'm looking for properly, so you can see it looks wider. So I'm going to crank the red up a little bit. If you do this and you notice that you still see the background, it might be because you're using an MXAO shader and it's rendering like really, really far. So you either can turn off your MXAO, or You can mess with the fade distance. Most MXAO have or just AO filters have like fade out, or how far does it render. So maybe just mess with that and you should see the background disappear fairly quickly. So I'm pretty satisfied with this. I think this red looks good. I'm gonna set the vertical previewer now. This is vertical previewer hidden in screenshot shader, and I have it hotkeyed on F9. So this is how I swap back and forth. And then you just either in the vanilla window, you can roll to a 90 degrees, or you can just do it in Ktisis. So here I'll do a 90 degrees, and then I'll kind of try to find an interesting angle before I start lighting. So now you can see the sun is affecting the character. So I'm just gonna mess with it a little bit until it's not anymore. That's pretty good. There we go. That's great. That's what I'm looking for. So the character's still lit up, but the sun's not affecting it. Now, in terms of what we're gonna do for lighting, if you're not familiar with photography, there's something called 3-point lighting, which is, well, you have your subject in the middle, you have the camera in front, and then you have 3 lights. So the first one is the key light, which is like the strong light, the one that illuminates your character the most. You have the fill light, which cancels out the shadows created by this key light. And then you have the backlight, or how I've been calling it this whole time, the highlight. Now, one thing that's great about playing Final Fantasy XIV is there's ambient light. So it's not like this scene, it's completely pitch black and nothing is rendered. So we don't actually need a fill light because there's already local illumination. So what I like to do is kind of inverse this. I will just use one key light for main illumination, and I'll use 2 highlights. So one to the left and one to the right, and then 1 key light placed depending on where the pose is facing. So that's what we're gonna do today. Of course, this is like really basic. It works most of the time, but lighting is very much an acquired taste and an acquired skill. So please, like, go crazy with your lighting, experiment, try out stuff, try 2 different key lights, try a bunch of highlights, try placing them in different angles that I have. Every pose is different. Every pose is a puzzle as to where you can illuminate things from. So go crazy. I'm gonna introduce to you guys something that works well most of the time, but it's not an end-all be-all, and if you do exactly what I do in your pose, maybe it will not look as good. So I'm just gonna give you the pieces of the puzzle, but you're gonna have to put them together yourself depending on what you're working with. So before we start placing lights, the last thing I want to introduce is this create new camera function from Ktisis. And the reason why I think this is really important, earlier I used the work camera to fly around and to demonstrate lights. The problem with this work camera is, as of right now, if you place lights, they're not always accurate to where you place them from. So again, you can see lights by toggling the overlay visibility, clicking the eye here. So you can see I was like standing all the way over here, but my light got dropped right in front of the character's face. So it's not accurate for dropping lights. So what we actually use is this multi-camera function. So I'm going to click the plus, create a new camera, and you can see now it's called camera 2. So I'm going to bring the camera over here, offset to camera model. Usually you need to do this for the first time for camera 2. Sometimes like your camera will just be a little bit wonky. It doesn't feel like all that accurate. Just click it once and then you'll be fine if it looks weird. And then I'll use that to drop lights. What's cool about this is you can freely swap between camera 1, camera 2, or however many cameras you have. This is nice because it lets you try different angles if you're someone who likes to take a lot of shots from a lot of different angles, but it's also really helpful because, again, lights don't have an undo button. So sometimes you're trying out stuff and you just mess it up beyond recognition. You don't know where your light is. You don't know where it's pointing anymore. It's a big headache. You don't know what to do. Well, you don't have to worry about it. All you have to do is you go back to that camera angle that you used to drop the light and you delete the current one, you create a new one, and bam, you're back at square one with that position that you liked at the beginning. So this is the reason why I like these a lot. So I'm going to try to find my initial framing at first. I'm going to go for something a little bit dynamic, rotate the camera a little bit, Rotates the character a little bit so we get some nice curves. Maybe I'll zoom in even a bit more. Tilt the camera like that. This is kind of a pose that I feel she would be towering over you rather than being straight ahead. Try to frame the character better. Nice. And while I am using the track camera gaze function from vanilla, it's not perfect. You will always have to edit it by yourself. So this is what I'm going to do now. First, I know for a fact that her hair is rigged properly, so I'm just going to move it out of the way. The way you do that for modded hair bones is you go here, you click hair, and then I know that it's this bone, so I'll set it to rotation and then just move it out of the way just like that. So we can kind of see what we're dealing with here. And then I'm going to click the eye left, link it to the right eye so that both move at the same time. That way you don't end up with any issues where the eyes are not looking in the same way. I'm going to raise them a little bit to something that looks nice, and then I'll use Brio to load an animation. More specifically, a facial animation. The way you do that is by going to blend. Blend means that it adds it on top of your current animation. So all facial animations are in blend. So you can either search for the emotes that you're looking for. For example, I want simper, so I type simper. Or if you just want to experiment with all of them, you can type facial. So then you can click play, and you can see that's how you use vanilla emotes. If your character is still kind of moving, that might just be because you haven't paused the character. So you can either just click pause here, or you can scrub it to 0, and then it'll be fine. If you're posing someone who has really crazy strandy hair, you might need to freeze physics here. So freeze physics just makes it so hair and the chest is not affected by wind anymore. But I recommend doing this before you start posing, because as you can see, it can affect the size of the chest, the tail, and the placement of the ponytail. So if you know that the person you're posing, just their hair is has a lot of moving parts and you can see it's really affected by wind, I would recommend freezing physics as you start. But in this case, she just has a ponytail, so it's really not a big issue. I can definitely work around it, and I want to save myself the hassle of resizing her chest to the right way. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this. I just need to load simper. That looks good. I'm gonna lower her eyelids a little bit just to look nice, and I'm gonna make her look at the camera, and I think that's pretty good. Maybe I'll see if I tilt the head a little bit, how that looks like. All right, I think this is what I'm going to work with. This is a simple pose. Again, this is a pre-made pose. I use mostly pre-made poses because I'm really bad at posing. But yeah, you can get really, really far with using pre-made poses. So now we start the fun part, the lighting part. So again, we have that second camera angle that we dropped behind the character earlier. I try to aim for seeing the spine of the character, but being a little bit tilted. So about this much. So you just create new light, drop your area light, and then you go back to the main camera. And the first thing that you have to do for every single light that you will drop is turn on all 3 shadows. So right now, I dropped this light and I'm thinking, well, this is nice on the thigh, but it's a little bit too much. I do like how it's highlighting the side of the face, but I think I could do better. So you have a few choices here. You can try to mess around with these rows. The first one is position. The second one is rotation, or you can mess with the light angles here. So I'm just going to try to physically move it a little bit, see how it looks like. Okay, I'm moving it this way. It's changing the lights like that. So I'm physically moving it in space. Okay, I kind of like this. There's a lot less on the butt. The thigh area, it still looks quite interesting. The horn is lit up in a cool way. I'm not too sure I'm a fan of this horn being underlit, but I like how it looks on the face here. So for now, I'm gonna leave it like this, and I'll look how the other highlight is looking, and then possibly come back to it. So you can right click your light and rename it. If you're gonna if you're gonna use a lot of lights, I recommend renaming all of them because it can get really confusing really quick. So I'm gonna rename this one to body right, and then I'm gonna swap back to camera 2, click the plus, and rotate around. Maybe you need to offset the camera angle to model again if you notice that you're not rotating perfectly around your character. Like this, and then I think in terms of lighting, this would be good. So I'm tilted above the character because I want to try to highlight this part, and if I'm too low and I drop it, you will not be able to see it from the main camera angle. So I'm going to try this one first, a little bit above, and we'll see how it looks. I go back, main area, right click the edit lighting, shadows, make sure that this light is selected. 1, 2, 3. All right, so now we get a little bit of highlight on the chest. The horn is quite highlighted. That's kind of okay for now. And then I'll mess with the position. So this is the up and down. So I will actually line it up with her short. So just like this. I'm physically moving the light up and down now. And this is where messing with the fall off power can be interesting. If you want some like really harsh highlight, you can bring the fall off power down, and now you can see it does this like really strong effect. This is a bit too strong, but if I just mess with it a little bit, oh, now this is looking a fair bit better. Okay, so again, we have these two lights. We have one on this side, we have one on this side, but now our character is not properly highlighted. And what I mean by this is, compared to the highlights that we have here, she's still very, very dark. Now, if you have photography background, you probably know what I'm going to introduce. This is basically frontal lighting at first that we're going to tilt and use to generate shadows. So I like to create a new camera angle because sometimes I'll just play around. So new camera angle, and then what you're going to do, sorry, I forgot to rename my light. So this is going to be body left, got to rename my light, and then I'm going to drop an area light, boom, right on the face of my character. So I'll call this one main or body. And I'm going to bring it down to the character's eyes, about this much. We will turn on the shadows, and now you can see as soon as I turn on shadows, it already adds some like interesting definition. If you were to do this with vanilla light, like if I set it to 0 and I dropped the vanilla lights just like that, this would be impossible to work with because you get no definition. It looks super bad. The character is really washed out. And even if you change it to like a type 1, oops, sorry, a type 1 or a type 2, like this is impossible to work with. The character's insanely blown out, and I mean, it looks good, but it could be better. It could be better. So we have this body light. I'm going to set the intensity back to 1. We have the shadows toggled on. And now something that I like to do is this light right now is shining directly in front of the character. What we can do is, again, with these light angles, so if we look at the pose, her face, like the main part of her face is here, but there's an arm in the way. So if I try to move the light directly to the right, there's going to be like a big shadow. So the way I usually do frontal lighting is actually quite easy. I will rotate the light to match the eye line, just like that. And then I'll fall off angle maybe a 2 or a 3 to diffuse it gently. So again, we're diffusing that square shape. And then I'm going to mess with the light angles here. So as you can see, when I change the light angles, it starts to generate some interesting shadows, right? So we have shadowing on the chest area. We have the hand, obviously, which at the moment is actually not super ideal. But it does generate some shadow around the thigh, on the underside of the arm. So I think this is already more visually appealing than having a frontal light. And on the other side, just like this, if we have the light like that, you can see it's also generating shadows on this side. So for this, All you want to do is, again, I'm going to set it back to 0. So we have the light at 0, 0. If you don't have anything that blocks your character's face, for example, so I'm just going to lower her forearm for demonstration purposes. So if you don't have anything blocking or like a main element, just like that. Actually, I might just take the pose like this for demo purposes. So if you don't have anything blocking, it's very easy. You just have to mess with the light angle. So just like that. But now I'm tilting the light, right? So it's moving away, and then I will physically move the position of the light back into shape. So now you can see we tilted it and I brought it back. So now the light is kind of sideways and it's generating shadows in a way that's way more interesting. So we have some shadows around the nose. We have some shadows around the chest area. We have some shadows with the arm. The thigh has shadows. Instead, if we didn't have this and we try to do this with a vanilla light, this is what it would look like. It's super flat. It's not visually interesting. It's not really appealing. So now obviously this light is too strong for her skin. So we're going to reduce the fall off power until it looks nice. And one thing that I like to do, this is especially good if you're working with someone who has very pale skin, is we're shining a white light directly at the character. So we're affecting the way her skin looks. If we're trying to bring some color back to her skin, all we have to do is go to color and ever so slightly drag it to the right when it's set to red. So as I drag it to the right, you'll see she'll go from like this sickly, really pale lighting to a lot more vibrant. So this is like before, and then I am happy with this after. I think this looks pretty good. So by editing the color of your main light, you can reintroduce some redness to the skin, because human skin has blood under and naturally it's redder. It's not perfectly white. So if I look at my lighting situation here, I'm actually quite happy. I have some highlights on some interesting parts of the body. I have some highlight on the face. I have some highlights here, which I think are nice. The horns are illuminated. I think that's pretty good. Now, the last thing I'm going to do in terms of posing, I might just move the ponytail around to give a bit more definition. So this ponytail is waved, so I might as well just have a little bit. And you can see here, this is where the wind starts to get annoying. So this is one of the reasons why you would want to freeze physics. Actually, I might just do that. You know what? I'll go ahead and freeze physics because I don't want to be fiddling with it. I'll just have to increase her chest size a little bit because they get shrunk down. So let me do that. Breast, I will mirror them, and then I'll just increase their scale a little bit to bring them back to how they were before. There you go. Just like that. So I think this is pretty good. You can see here the light that we set earlier for the body kind of stops around the eye line, so it does create like this interesting visual area where the important part is lit up, and here this front part of the hair adds some nice contrast to that. If it doesn't look particularly good, you can always just move the light physically and bring it up and highlight the whole thing. But as you can see, we lose some contrast, so I don't really like it. And then in terms of doing more advanced lighting, you can get crazy with it. You can, for example, rotate the light. So I'm going to make it red so it's super obvious. Just going to save this for later. I'm going to make it red. And then you can rotate the light, and then you can see here, this is the corner. This is the corner of the shape. So you could go for something where only half of the eye would be highlighted. You can have like a shape like this, like that. Have the shape like that and diffuse it a little bit. You can, depending on the pose, you can really do some cool stuff, right? You can even choose to manually light the face and then do something else for the body. Like, the possibilities are endless. This is really just a very, very basic way to light up most characters in a way that I've had success with. And then another thing you can do is you don't have to have one highlight for an entire side. So for example, here, let's say I liked this body left light, but I wanted to change the color of this part for whatever reason. So again, this light here, the body left is shining on here. Let me make it, well, red is hard to see. So let me make it like green maybe. So you can see it's affecting this, it's affecting the breast, and it's affecting the horn and the neck. If I wanted to maybe have a different kind of light, all you could do is lower this light until it doesn't affect anymore, and then you can go back to your camera and just drop another one and mess with that. So yes, you can do a lot with 3 lights, but you can actually have as much as like 7, 8 lights if you want. Just experiment and get crazy with it. So actually, I think this looks pretty good. I might just put this one to 0. The reason why I do this instead of deleting them is when you set them to 0, if you need them later, you can just set them back to 1 to have them back. And then the shadows, I'll toggle on the shadows again. Okay. I'll mess with the light angle a little bit to see if it can create something more interesting. Oh, okay. We get a little bit more illumination on the chest. That's nice. And I'll lower it to have it back to how it was on the short. I think this is pretty nice. And I'll try to make it a little bit harsher as well. Just like that. And now in terms of shaders, what I like to do is I use a technique where I use a PNG of a vignette. If you're not familiar with vignetting, basically vignetting is when you darken the edge of an image to bring attention to the center of the image. So just like that. You see how this is darkening. The problem with vignetting is that it renders on top of your character. So just now, we spent a lot of time manually lighting everything, and we don't really want to interfere with that. So instead, what I like to do is I use this stage depth shader. What a stage depth shader is it lets you render any image on top of your scene. So in your Reshade Shaders folder, there's a folder called Textures, and inside Textures, actually, let me grab it quickly. Shaders. There's Textures, and all of these are images that you can load in-game using stage depth. So for example, I use a different one. I use multi-stage depth for personal reasons, but if you wanted to do this, you might have the stage depth, so you can just search for it. You can search stage depth and move to top, right click, move to top, and then you bring it where you want it. And then you can see here it's loading I think it's the Gposing way default image. So if I render it on top, you can see it renders on top. And then you can choose which image you want to render by going to stage text, and then you can see the name. So let's say, for example, I wanted to load, I don't know, let's pick one. Elva Rainbow Light 4.jpg. Let me just copy that quickly, rename. And then I'm going to go here, put it in quotation marks, Elva Rainbow Light 4.jpg, press enter. Now, boom, it's rendering on top. Obviously, this is a black image, so you can mess with the blending. But I think for black images, you have to set it to screen. Yeah, exactly. So screen is the one that removes black. So if your image loads in and it looks black, you have to set it to screen. But in this case, yeah, this is how you would load an image. And the reason why I like this for vignetting is actually you can make the vignette render behind your character. So you can see here, this is the vignette image that I'm loading, and I will lower the depth at which it's rendered at. So it's loading behind my character now. And then as I lower the blending, it kind of creates this subtle but interesting effect that draws your eye on the character, kind of like a halo effect. And this just adds a little bit of wow to your Gpose. And you can see here my shader doesn't have a lot going for it. So actually, if you light up your scene properly, even in vanilla, it'll look really good. So this is with no shaders at all, and the image still looks pretty dang nice. The shader just makes it go from a 80% to a 95%. Good. And then for personal preference, you can add some bloom. I like to add bloom just to have a bit of diffusion, and so you can mess with the bloom. So sometimes I'll add a bloom and lens flare and then mess with the bloom threshold, which is how much bloom is added, just to kind of diffuse the silhouette of my character a little bit. The person who taught me this, Aster, likes to use ADOF to diffuse the silhouette of your character a little bit. I personally don't find a lot of success with it because I Gpose modded people a lot, and I found that ADOF kind of messes with hair a lot, so I'll usually leave it off, but it's there. You can see here it messes with this part of the hair in just a way that I don't find really flattering. So that's pretty much it. And then, so I'm happy with the lens flare. I have my MXAO here, and I think I'm ready to take a picture. So I use the XIV resizer in order to take picture. So in order to take pictures, so that's in, sorry, not settings, XL plugins. There's something called XIV window resizer. So you can use this to upscale your game to 4K to take your pictures in 4K. My game runs in 2K, but upscaling them to 4K just means I get more quality and overall the shots look better, especially if you're using bloom. It helps a lot with bloom, so you can use that. It lets you set your game to basically any size. So I usually will set it to 4K. I have a plugin that kind of automates me typing the command. So I have my upscale command and my reset command, as well as my being able to open and close Glamour and Penumbra. But I'm not going to do it while recording because my computer might explode. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Usually I would just upscale the Gpose, take the shot, and then I would be good for the day. So again, just to remind you, actually I might just demo it here. So I might just demo it. So I'm going to go back to the work camera. Sorry, it'll be a little bit hard to see because of the fog, but I want to show you where all the lights are. So we have basically the tri-point photography. So we have the main lights, the body lights that's illuminating. We have one light here, one light there, and then this is just an extra one that I added for demo purposes. If we didn't have that one, the effect will still be the same. And if we refer to this 3-point lighting setup, that's pretty much what we have, just in a reverse setting. So this is what you're kind of trying to do, depending on what the pose is. Go. So I'm pretty happy with this. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, my DMs are always open if we're mutual, so don't hesitate to send me a message. Yeah, I hope you learned something. And honestly, like, I really look forward to people taking these tools and just becoming better than me and just creating amazing stuff, because while I'm decent at lighting, I really don't think I'm the best. I can name off a bunch of people that I think are better at me than me at Gposing. So I hope you learned something, and I hope you just get crazy with it and you start taking amazing portraits and send them to me because I would love to see them. So yeah, thank you for watching and have a good night. Bye-bye. Aha, actually I lied. While I was color editing this Gpose, I usually color edit before I exit Gpose in case of something like this happens. I found a few things that I wanted to correct that I wasn't super happy with, so I'm gonna quickly go through them. The first thing is I don't really like this bloom effect on the rope of the hoodie. At first I thought that this was coming from my bloom shader, but actually it's not. It's caused by the fact that my highlight light, this one here, the fall off power is set too low, so it's causing some like shine and bloom. So I'm just going to lower that a little bit to remove this. And then I don't particularly like the way this light is lining up with her hairline. I know I can do better. So this might work if you're doing more of a pose that's closer to the front. But for this, what I'm going to do is rotate the light. So I'm going to grab the body light, I'm going to rotate it. And then as I rotate it, of course, it raises it, but it's okay. You can always just lower it. So I'm rotating it, lowering it. And now this lines up more evenly with the way her hair is facing. And it's not as drawing. And because this horn is already lit, you actually can't really see where the line is. So I think this looks better. So we remove the bloom and that's done. And then also I kind of decided that I wanted to do a close-up version. So I'm going to create another camera angle and kind of increase the FOV a little bit. And then maybe just mess with that, see if I can get something nice. So maybe looking down. Oh yeah, we do have Limsa there. So maybe I'll do something like this. This looks pretty good, just like that. Obviously, I'll have to edit her face to match with that. So I'm going to lower the eyelids just a little bit and edit the way the eyes are positioned. So just like this looks pretty good. So we're going to have two angles to give to Loki here. The first one is this one, kind of zoomed out main camera, and then we have the shot that's a little bit closer from under where she's looking directly at the camera. So I think this looks a lot better and I'm quite happy. I can kind of still see the bloom a little bit here, so I'll just tweak it a bit more. There we go, now it's gone. I think this is just a property of how this lace is made. So yeah, now this is actually by. I'm done with my edits. So this was just a last minute thing. But yeah, thank you for watching. Bye bye.